Welcome to our Peer Review Week 2025 webinar, Engaging with Artificial Intelligence for Reviewers, Authors, and Editors. This AI-focused session fits with the current Peer Review Week theme, Rethinking Peer Review in the AI Era. Our presenters are Daniel Ucko, Head of Ethics and Research Integrity at the American Physical Society, Laura Feetham-Walker, Reviewer Engagement Manager at IOP Publishing, and Brian Solis, Senior Journal Manager at AIP Publishing. My name is Randie Fourneir, and I'll be your moderator. Today's webinar will consist of a 30-minute discussion followed by answers to pre-submitted questions for the remainder of the time. With that, I will pass it over to Brian.
Thank you, Randie. Thank you so much for having me at this webinar. I thought we'd start out by just explaining a little bit about what we consider to be AI and not AI, and all the different types of AIs there are to sort of frame our discussion. I think when most people think of AI, they're thinking of LLMs, the large language models that have been so popular since the release of ChatGPT. And that, a large language model, is an overlap of something called a natural language processing engine and deep learning. And deep learning is a type of machine learning that uses artificial neural networks that enables digital systems to learn and to make decisions based on unstructured or unlabeled data. And with deep learning, instead of just responding to a set of rules, these systems build knowledge from examples, and they use that knowledge to react and to behave and to perform much like humans do. And that sort of gives it an ability to interpret and manipulate and comprehend human language through these natural language processors. But these are what we call generative AI. It's creating something from what the prompt is. And that's not the only form of AI that's useful, especially in the scientific and peer review context. So we want to also think about non-generative AI, which is traditional AI, and that can make predictions and even personalized recommendations based on rules and patterns. And so while many generative AI results have been disproven, there are things called hallucinations where they just make things up. They lie to you and they give you false information. We know that all AI has to be scrutinized and maintained to ensure that the accuracy is there and that you can continue to make improvements on them. So I think when we discuss AI in these contexts, we should be clear to define what AI we're using and what the context is.
Okay, shall we get started with our pre-submitted questions, or does anyone else have any comments to add?
I could just add that I totally agree with Brian that defining our terms is very important when we're talking about AI in any context. And that is and particularly from the point of view of publishers, it's very important when just designing policy, because it can just become an overwhelmingly large and scary concept if you just talk about AI and you don't pick apart exactly what the flavors of AI are, what the use cases of AI are, and how they impact the peer review and manuscript evaluation process. So with that, I think we can get a much better handle on the issue by being very clear what we're talking about.
All right, so let's continue with our key discussion points. Could we talk a little bit more about keeping the peer in peer review, such as emphasizing human expertise and responsibility in the review process, and maybe also touch on gender and age disparities, who's creating using AI?
I can start us off there a little bit, and I'll reach back a little bit about the history of peer review. I'm not going to go into too much detail about various models of peer review, but what it really did start with was the idea that in order to be treated as science as part of the scientific corpus of results, they had to be witnessed in some way. It goes back actually to earlier eras such as the Royal Society, when you had these witnessed experiments in large lecture theatres and in similar halls, and publications became a form of witnessing, a virtual witnessing, And that's why papers are written in the way that they are, in order to basically explain that how the result is done. So peer review is another form of the witnessing, because before you get to expose, so to speak, your results to a wider audience by publishing them, they first, in the mode, they pass through a review. So the reviewers are the first readers. So it's important that is basically that. I'd like to basically draw attention to the word peer in peer review. And as AI and AI tools are introduced more and more into the process, I think it's very important for publishers not to lose sight of the idea of peer evaluation. As we know, peer review is a system that's built very much on trust, and the idea that that the evaluation is by the peers. I'm talking now of that the evaluation is done by peers rather than by a computer is a very important thing, and losing sight of that risks undermining trust in the entire peer review process. And that is true whether it is pre-publication or post-publication peer review, any of the models. The important thing to hang on to here is the evaluation by peers.
I completely agree. So we recently did a study. We asked the physical science researcher community several questions, lots of questions about AI and peer review. That's going to be released this week, Peer Review Week. And people have really strong opinions about peer in peer review, you know? So we asked them how they would feel, among other things, we asked them how they would feel if a reviewer of a paper that they had co-authored used AI to either write the peer review in full or to augment that peer review report. And, you know, the responses were very polarizing, but 57% of respondents, I've just got the results here, 57% of respondents said they'd be unhappy if a reviewer used generative AI to write a peer review report in its entirety. And 42% said they'd be unhappy if a reviewer used generative AI to kind of, clean up a peer review report or, change the grammar. So there are strong viewpoints out there within the community. We also asked more generally, how do people feel about what the impact of AI on peer review is going to be? And this is a question that we asked last year as well. So we wanted to kind of compare and see whether kind of people's opinions are diverging or going in a certain direction. And views are very polarized. Last year when we asked, roughly 30% of people in the physical science community said that AI was going to have a negative net impact on peer review. About a third were neutral, and about a third said it would have a positive impact. And then when we've asked again, there are fewer people who are neutral about this, right? So people have gone further towards either this is going to have a negative impact or this is going to have a positive impact. And that might be because people are just more aware in 2025 of what these tools do and kind of their flaws and their benefits. Or it might genuinely be because people are just becoming more polarized. But it kind of highlights this tightrope that we walk as publishers when we try and formulate policies around this, because, if a large chunk of people are really positive about it, they find it useful, for particularly if they don't have English as a first language, for kind of editing the grammar of their review, and it helps them. But another very substantial chunk of people don't want it used at all to review their paper. Where does that leave us? So that's kind of one question maybe for discussion. But actually, Randie, you asked about gender and career stage. So just to delve a little bit more into that, there have been consistent findings across lots of different studies, including ours, when we did a sub-analysis by gender. Women tend to be more negative and less positive about AI tools. Women, compared to men, tend to have more ethical concerns and just, generally aren't as keen. So that's what we found. And we also found a bit of a generational divide among physical science researchers. Early career researchers, much more likely to have a positive viewpoint of the impact that these tools are going to have. And senior researchers, a little bit less positive. So there are also dividing lines here. So Anyway, back to you, Randie, but maybe we could talk about
Well, I'd like to
how
just
we formulate
mention.
policy. Sorry, Brian.
No, Laura, because you're absolutely right. It's polarizing for sure, but I think we as publishers have to acknowledge that AI is being used. Everyone is using it, whether we want them to or not, and that is why we as publishers have to have clear guidelines and policies on what you can use. And I want to emphasize that not all AI is equal or should be taken the same way. You specifically mentioned in that survey generative AI, but as I mentioned in the beginning, there are other tools, and we're already using AI tools in the publishing life cycle. We're thinking right now about analysis and helping us write, but there's things like doing a proper reference search. There's grammatical and formatting issues. There are a variety of AI tools that are available that could be quite useful, and some of them could be helpful for the peer review process. Others were being used to detect research integrity issues, or plenty of tools are helping editors to find more appropriate reviewers for their articles. And if those reviewers are then turning around and using AI as well, we just have to be mindful of what's being used and ensure that it's disclosed properly.
Thanks, you're completely right. We did ask specifically about generative AI, so thanks for pulling me up because yeah, I totally agree.
And then, of course, how everyone feels about it is another thing. And we need to ensure that people are using these tools responsibly and the right type of tools that aren't necessarily giving incorrect information.
Yeah. So maybe this is a good segue into talking a little about as what we're doing as publishers and about our policies. At the American Physical Society, our policies have been elaborated out of a sense of curiosity to this point about how it's actually being used in the community, because we can't dictate policy in a vacuum and ignore what our authors and our reviewers, what the researchers we interact with are actually, how they're actually using these tools. The key thread that runs through our policies, all as they are about any kind of AI generated content, is the idea that the final responsibility lies with the authors. That we are allowing a certain amount of AI use to improve a manuscript and for other such analysis and everything like that. But we are wanting this final responsibility to lie with the authors. Similarly, for reviewers, we don't allow reviewers to just upload a manuscript into a large language model, because there are issues about that with regards to that we're not clear where it goes, which raises confidentiality issues about the manuscript, but also because a non-negligible fraction of the papers that we review actually contain wrong information, not perhaps catastrophically wrong information, but some wrong information that hopefully gets washed out in the peer review process. And if incorrect information is used to train AI, then there can be a propagation of misinformation. So that's another reason why not to allow that. We also take a hard line on AI generated images because of possible copyright infringement and uncertainty and about the creative process about who can it be credited to. But generally speaking, we put that the responsibility of the researcher first, that it is a tool. AI certainly can't be an author, and we would like to keep it. Sounds very dramatic when I say keep it in its place, but we would like to have it used in the proper context. And I think that I mean, you might want to add some things about the policies from AIP and IOP, maybe on this. You too.
I think we're quite aligned on the overall ideas there. Certainly, some would say, well, my paper's on archive anyway. What does it matter if I'm uploading it to some other thing? But it really has to do with the confidentiality. A reviewer can't break the confidentiality of the publisher by putting it somewhere on some server located in who knows where. And that's also an issue that it gets misused. So That's exactly right. We don't permit reviewers uploading pieces of the manuscript to external sources. However, if they want to use their own system to, some chat GPT or some other generative AI to help improve their writing of the report, that seems to be okay. Again, they are the ones that have to abide by the review that they submit. And so if they have that final say and they say, we just needed it to fix my grammar, make sure that presentation was correct, that's okay. Same thing with authors. If they choose to use it in some way, as long as it's disclosed, they use this tool just like any simulation software that might be used for doing research. It's the same thing. I use this tool to rewrite this paragraph, and that would be disclosed to the editors, and they can then use that information as they need during the peer review process.
Mm. So it's interesting because our current policy for peer reviewers actually diverges from your guys. It's completely prohibitive, actually. So we say that reviewers can't use it at all for the reasons that you've outlined. But actually looking at the results of this survey, we asked people, it was a completely anonymous survey, and we said, do you use these tools and which tools do you use? And 32% of respondents said that they kind of have or regularly do use AI tools to do peer review. So the prohibitive approach isn't necessarily working. And actually, of that 32%, Daniel, you mentioned, people uploading the entire manuscript to these kind of unsecured locations. Well, 40% of those people said that they do exactly that. They upload the manuscript and they ask whatever the tool is to summarize it, and then they base their review on that summary. So there's kind of a lot to unpack. Our current policy of saying you can't do anything at all, that's maybe needs to be perhaps reviewed at some point in the future. Now we have more information about people are using these tools, right? We need some kind of a pragmatic, transparent, open approach, which, like you say, Brian, allows people to say, okay, I did use it and this is specifically how I used it. And that could then be relayed to the authors as well, so that they're fully aware of how much of that review was augmented or written by generative AI. Yeah.
The editors also really need to know.
Yeah.
If the editors are making a decision based on expert reviewers, and some of those expert reviewers are not necessarily providing their expert review, they're providing some summary. I mean, AI will write a paper and then AI will review the paper and eventually we'll all get replaced, right? We need to keep the human element there as part of the process.
If I could just tie this in a little bit with the Purpose-Led Publishing Coalition, which not everybody might be aware of, that AIP, IOP, and APS are in a collaboration coalition called Purpose-Led Publishing. It is becoming becoming a burden for researchers to have front and center and in mind constantly different policies about AI use from different publishers. So I think that it would be a really great idea for publishers to harmonize their policies, not all to get on board with what APS is saying, but to make it easier for researchers not to have to constantly go, okay, I'm submitting to this journal. Now, what's this specific policy about, and how does it differ from the last place I last submitted my journal, my research to? So that is something which I think would be a really good thing, that development that would help researchers a lot as they navigate the publication sphere.
Yeah, I agree. We should aim to do that.
On that note, maybe we can talk a little bit about some responsible and practical AI uses for reviewers and authors to maybe lower the burden on reviewers, maybe mention some acceptable use cases, ways to balance opportunities with integrity considerations.
Yeah, we know there's certainly an appetite for use of AI. As Laura just said, people are using it in ways that perhaps we didn't want them to use it. But as I mentioned earlier, there are actually a lot of different tools that are available that I think are useful for authors in a way that is responsible and ethical. And I mentioned earlier to support academic writing for English as a second language, for example, in the editorial process, such as finding reviewers or summarization tools that can be useful for authors to promote their work after it's published. These are all ways that you can use AI tools responsibly, making sure that you're checking everything along the way. That's, of course, being really, really vital.
And I feel like in the ideal scenario, we would have kind of integrated data safe tools that we had carefully developed so that people can use these tools within the submission system. We know that that data, that confidential information isn't going anywhere. We don't want it to. We know how it's being used. We know how the model's been trained. We understand the biases. And also there'll be kind of clearer controls about exactly how they're being used. Because actually we don't want these tools to be used to do analysis because that's not what they do. So something that's integrated, that sits within our systems, that really should be the ultimate goal. And also something that reviewers can opt in and out of. I think that's quite important when there's such strong viewpoints. There will be a large proportion of people who don't want this. So it would be good to allow them to choose, I think.
It's a very good point. And I'd like to bring up the question of disclosures and transparency with this. This ties in a little bit of the policy that we were talking about just now. It is really useful to be as clear as possible about AI use from any participant in the peer review process, and I include editors in this. If editors are using AI tools, for instance, to screen submissions, then they should be transparent about that. And authors should be, and the reviewers as well, should be transparent about their AI use, not in a performative way, not in some sort of come in here and declare your sins, but about clarity about who does what and what has been done. It is also a matter of reproducibility, which is an integrity issue, because if there's some sort of opaque process that has gone into whatever is being done, and I'm talking about a much broader thing, AI generation rather than just text, then unless we know what's happened, we can't have an opaque secret source kind of approach to research. The whole idea about this about publishing research is that it should be published and presented in a manner that facilitates reproduction and building on the research in question for further research.
Mm-hmm. I agree, and I think we could do with quite a good information campaign about what the consumer-facing generative AI tools actually do. If we're talking about transparency, I think there needs to be greater transparency and clarity about very specifically, what are these tools doing? Because to some extent, they are just stitching words together. And there is a great deal of misunderstanding about how they work. And I think this is something that publishers can do and can contribute to. I think it also needs to come from institutions and from other sources, because the capabilities of these tools have been overhyped in some quarters. And when we looked at the free text responses of this survey that we did, physical science researchers, an alarmingly high proportion of people really believe that these tools can do kind of original, like high-level logical thinking and analysis. And actually, that's been proved to be false. And most recently, in a study that came out last week that looked at whether ChatGPT, specifically they looked at ChatGPT, could take retractions into account when it was asked to summarize published papers. It couldn't see the flaws. It was overly positive, and it couldn't kind of see or understand the retraction process. So I think the transparency issue, also needs to focus on that. Like, what are these tools okay for, and what can they really not do? Yeah.
I think this is a really good point about like the training of the data itself. A lot of large publishers have made deals with different groups or are developing in-house their own AI tools based on their own corpus of data to have these centralized servers and tools that are potentially more trustworthy. And PLP, as Daniel mentioned, the purpose-led publishing, this coalition allows AIP Publishing, IOP Publishing, and the American Physical Society to join together, the three largest not-for-profit publishers in physics, to join together and sort of compete on a level with some of these higher, larger publishers, and that we can together have more unified guidance on AI and can work together in the ways that we're doing now through this discussion.
To that end, could you tell us about the peer review assistant pilot project, Brian?
Sure. So one of my colleagues and Michael posted a few months ago an announcement on LinkedIn that PLP was working on a peer review assistant. And the idea behind the peer review assistant was to have some time-saving effect for editors and peer reviewers when dealing with submitted manuscripts. So we consider this tool that's sort of in testing as an extension of the normal human peer review process. As an example, citations can be considered as the currency of research, and there's self-citation rates and relevancy of those citations. Can we have a tool that assesses the relevancy of the citations in a particular manuscript, checks that they're actually relevant to the subject area, and assess a level of self-citation for the research integrity aspect? That's something that perhaps an AI tool can help with. Can we automate and enhance some of the tasks that we expect editors and authors doing during the typical peer review process? Not to say that they're just doing what Laura said and putting it entirely in and summarizing it and basing the review off that. So the peer review assistant project has been incorporated into a product called the Hum Alchemist Review. Hum, of course, is a publisher, a company that makes tools for publishers. The AI product for publishers is still evolving. Our future path is to continue testing it, seeing how useful it is, seeing if it makes the process more efficient, but also maintaining the judgment and the trust that the researchers find essential in our work as publishers. That's just a little update on PRA, peer review assistant.
Great. Have you experienced any potential author concerns around AI versus human review that might be addressed by the peer review assistant?
Well, we hope that, as Laura mentioned, there's a place that is trusted. So there's a place where if you were to upload an entire manuscript, it's not going to end up being used in a way that you don't agree with. It's confidentiality agreement, it's potentially copyright infringement issues. So we have potentially legal issues as well. The use of figures, Daniel mentioned figures being taken and credit not necessarily being given. So it's very important that is all part of the process, and that the utility and the use of any of these tools, whether they're AI tools or not, understanding that everyone is using their own data to make some AI tool, and they're going to monetize it, and they're going to use their own information to train it. And when you have a trusted organization like PLP amongst our three organizations, we can hopefully come up with something that is useful, trusted, and not going to provide the kind of mistakes that have been well documented in AI in the public sphere.
With that, we could also touch on, an overall discussion of the future outlook of AI, questions regarding Gemini. Maybe there's some fatalism around AI, where we think it might go in the future.
Yeah, I could to start us off there, but maybe I haven't given this some thought. I mean, it would not be an understatement to say that the current debate around AI is operating at quite a high temperature, and it runs the gamut from breathless hype and enthusiasm to fear. And it also is important. This is not a technology that's arisen out of a vacuum, and no technology does. But it also, to my analysis, hasn't really either arisen out of a clearly articulated need. Which is not to say that it's useless, which is not to say that it's not needed in some ways, but because there isn't a clearly articulated need, a lot of people are putting their own hopes, dreams, expectations, and fears into AI. It's reminding me a little bit about the debates around nanotechnology back in the 1990s, where arguably there was a slightly better articulated need. But then as well, the debate ranged from um, all of the wonderful things that would be able to do. Some of them quite like cells will be able to set up miniature factories inside of your body to we're all going to dissolve into grey goo. And in the end, nanotechnology is now turned into a mature technology, which is used in very many aspects of human life, but it's sort of existing in a way that editors of magazines aren't asking for a 1,000-word think piece about nanotechnology to have that on my desk by Tuesday. Something very similar may very well happen with AI as a maturing technology. It is really dangerous to make predictions about the future. I'm hoping that we do get to some sort of a less hyperventilating response towards AI in all walks of life, not just in peer review, which happens to be something I think is very important, but perhaps the rest of the world doesn't share my particular focus there. And but with such great societal changes that come with the technology, with so much promise and so much possible disruption of our life, there comes a sort of sense of inevitability, and perhaps it leads into a degree of fatalism. And I do think that whatever side of the spectrum of your reactions towards AI is, whether you're of the incredibly enthusiastic type or the incredibly fearful type, I think that fatalism is bad for either of those, any part of the spectrum, because it prevents us from analyzing and criticizing and evaluating the technology honestly. And it also is very tempting then to treat it as some sort of a force of nature, or perhaps even more dangerously, of anthropomorphizing it and saying that AI wants or desires or things. I mean, I read an article about if AI's feelings can be hurt. I don't think we're there yet, but it because of the way that we interact with AI, there's great temptation to anthropomorphize the technology. And as anybody who's ever cursed at their car knows, that is not really a productive attitude to have towards technology. So we'll see what happens, I guess. But,
Do you mind if I just talk to that point about fatalism as well? I
not at all.
completely agree with everything you said, but these AI tools have been presented very fatalistically. And I think there's beginning to be a little bit of pushback again about that. You know, it's been very much, this is going to happen. And if you don't keep up, you're going to be left behind, like that kind of narrative. And the difficulty with that is that top-down approach just isn't really throughout human history how tools have been adopted, right? Tools, successful tools that really make a difference are adopted at the level of communities, okay? It's communities who decide whether this thing is going to work for them in that particular goal. And ultimately, that's what's, I think, going to happen with these tools. And in our case, it's the physical sciences community who are going to decide how they want these tools to work, which bits they want to use for peer review and which bits they don't. And actually, we're in a really good position as purpose-led publishers and as society publishers who are embedded in these communities to kind of bridge that gap. And I think what we need to do is keep talking to our communities, keep asking them salient questions about AI and listen really carefully to their answers. Because currently the views are very polarized, but at some point we're going to get, there's a lot of noise. I think we're going to get to some kind of equilibrium. And that's when we're going to learn exactly how the community has decided to use these tools in the future. And that's just my opinion. But yeah.
Thanks, Laura. I think there's no one size fits all. People want to have one tool that they can do everything, and we haven't reached that level of technology yet. Even though There's many that are hyping the technologies, and that's where I think the fatalism comes from. That there's something that's so powerful out there that you better get on board with it. But as Laura said, little pieces of it are going to be used in one way or another. We don't necessarily need to use generative AI for everything to do our thinking for us, which has showed there are issues with that. People are actually de-skilling in certain areas as they use these tools more. And so finding maybe some more traditional or narrow AI that can focus on a particular aspect of research. And we can use that tool in the same way we use everything else. Imagine what we did before Excel and just the basics of spreadsheets and doing analysis on a computer. I think AI could lead us in a similar way, just improve our natural ability to solve problems and to do research.
Thanks, everyone. Are we ready to move on to our pre-submitted questions?
Yep.
Great,
All right, let's go.
Let's do some Q&A. The first one is about addresses the larger implications of AI. The question is, due to geopolitical changes, are the AI machines restricted to reveal gathering results when a European searches for information from other continents? How objective are the replying results from the AI?
I could
Go
start
for it,
off a
Daniel.
little bit about well, I mean, the starters, one could go a long way by just unpacking what the word objective means. It is absolutely true, though, and whoever submitted this question makes a very good point that the AI, it's dependent on and is shaped by the training data. Yeah, the training data isn't just ingested in some sort of way that somebody might eat a phone book, but it is incorporated in with different weighting and things like that. I neither will or can totally explain exactly how, because it also varies. But yes, there one should take all of this very much, although anything that comes out of some AI system with an eye towards questioning and interrogating the origins of the information that's being given to you in the same way that you would consider the origins of the information for anybody who talks to you and tells you anything in particular, where they're coming from, what is their perspective, and which we all have, that this is that this it's tempting to think that just because something comes through to you through a computer screen, that means that it's necessarily more objective than subjective, whatever that means. And certainly there is a geopolitical weighting, and then you might find yourself with quite different results depending on where you are in the world and what kind of model you're using.
I think that's a good summary. Where you are and what tool you use will not give you the same result.
All right, our next question is more responsibility focused. The question is, how can AI help reviewers write reports that are as good as the ones submitted by outstanding referees?
That's the goal, right? How can AI be used to help people in the process? I think there's a couple different ways that an AI can help in the writing of the language or doing an assessment of the references, like I mentioned earlier. But it all comes down to the format of writing a review. There's a process to using the expertise and the knowledge of a reviewer. That's the heart of peer review that can't be replicated with current technology. As far, with the current AI can't do those reviews for you. So how can you use it as a tool to help you get the information you need to make an assessment? Can it easily bring you relevant references to check? Can it do some analysis for you in a way that's not something that only a human should be doing at this point? I think that's the really important part, is that AI can potentially help a reviewer do the review, And they maybe even help them put them into words and help put their thoughts into a nice presentation, but it can't do the review. That's why we need reviewers.
I agree. And that's not just like an ethical point. It can't do the review for these ethical reasons. We know we see fully AI authored peer review reports all the time, and I'm sure most people who work in publishing have at some point asked an AI chatbot to write a peer review report. And the fact is, they often look quite impressive. Maybe they're quite lengthy and they've got lots of bullet points or italics or whatever. They look grammatically correct, but the depth of the expertise and the knowledge just isn't there. And if you talk to editors of journals, they will have noticed this as well. And I mean, this is quite aside from the issue of hallucinations, which is a real perennial problem, which we still see a lot of, particularly hallucinations around things like references. But in response to our survey, we asked people what are the hallmarks of AI generated reviews, and a very, very common answer was it just lacks the depth of knowledge. They can tell, not based on hallucinations, but because that the reviews aren't very good. So the question was, how can AI help to write an outstanding report? It can help with grammar, it can help with structure. It really can't do much else, the current tools as of September 2025. And we really need to be clear about differentiating what these can and cannot do constructively.
I mean, there are some things that are sort of part of writing a report, like checking the bibliography. It can give some kind of analysis. It can look into see are all these references quite relevant to the paper in question? Are they spurious? I have hopes that at least some AI programs might be able to spot if a reference has been retracted or not. So things like that are actually if done manually, can be quite tedious, and everything can free up the referee's time and attention towards more focus on what's important in writing the report. So I would view it as an assistant. I would not view it as a driver towards writing a report as good as an outstanding referee.
Seems to be the theme that we've mentioned, is that in all these tools, all of them are just assistants, and that may be why our peer review assistant is named as such. That we can't totally submit to AI.
Thanks, Brian. Are there any closing thoughts that anyone would like to share before we wrap up?
I think the main thing I just want to put across is that I think in peer review in particular, researchers talking to each other is the end goal. It is not, it isn't the means, but it is the thing that we're aiming for. So therefore, I re-emphasize my slogan or such to keep the peer in peer review.
I like it. Keep the peer in peer review, of course. I just want to thank you, our speakers, Daniel, Laura, and Brian, as well as our viewers and those who submitted questions in advance of today's session. We really look forward to seeing how the relationship between AI and scientific journals will continue to evolve. And I also wanted to mention that if anyone wants to learn more about Peer Review Week, there's a link, peerreviewweek.net. So thanks again, everyone, and enjoy the rest of your day.
Thank you.
Thank you so
Thank
much.
you.